that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. I want to welcome everyone to this show. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell. I'm George Harvey, and this is Tom Finnell.
I'm Tom Finnell.
Say hi to Tom. What we're doing here is we're going through a list of energy-related or climate change-related news that I've posted on my blog, geoharvey.wordpress.com, in the last week. And I suppose we might as well just go straight into it. And this week I did one thing new. I got very smart, and in addition to putting the dates down, I put the day of the week.
Well,
Okay.
I try to look, I look at all of your blogs, and I try to anticipate which ones you're going to talk about.
And you're usually right.
Then I put something down. And this week I've done something a little bit different.
What's that?
If there isn't an image in the article you've referenced,
Okay.
I've tried to pick up an outside
Oh,
image
wow.
that's appropriate.
Oh, good for you.
Which helps me locate the particular blurb or the particular thing that I've got. So that might be a little bit more interesting.
Okay. Should I just go ahead now?
Yeah,
with the news?
go right
Okay,
ahead.
let's do that. Okay, starting with Friday, the 27th of June. Utilities in Queensland, this is Australia obviously, are looking to limit and even stop households exporting excess electricity back to the grid from their rooftop solar panels in a move that other Australian network operators are expected to follow. This is going to be an interesting thing to see happening because they are losing customers, and when they do that, they're going to have people putting battery backup in their houses.
Well, it's
just going off grid.
it's the craziest thing. Well, you can see it's all politics because they had a change of administration, and a new administration seems to be violently anti-renewable. And the Australian people are looking around and say, hey, this is saving me money.
And they've had...
I don't own a coal mine.
They've had entire towns discussing cutting themselves off from the grid.
Yeah,
Whole
absolutely.
town size.
Well, it makes more sense there than it does here simply because they're more widely dispersed. But it makes sense here too. Maybe not completely cutting yourself off the grid, but building a microgrid.
Building a microgrid.
I mean, we should be doing that right here in Brattleboro.
Especially from the point of view of security.
So absolutely.
Yeah.
The grid goes down, we have power. Maybe everybody doesn't have power, but the hospital has power, the grocery stores have power, the gas stations have power.
Yeah, exactly.
The municipal building has power.
Right.
We can still do the show.
That's right. There you go. We can broadcast the show so that people who don't have power can watch it.
Yeah.
Next item. Now that we've cleared that up, China's renewable energy capacity increased from 27.8 gigawatts in 2001 to 183 gigawatts in 2013. From 27.8, almost 28, to 183 in 12 years. And alternative energy sources are expected to account for more than 20% of the country's total electric generation by 2020, according to research and consulting firm Global Data.
So they're making progress.
They're making progress, and they're also expecting the output of their coal plants to peak in the near future.
Well, they're still building new coal plants, aren't they?
They are still building new coal plants.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, it's such a vast country. And,
well, a coal plant takes so long to build that between the time that you've committed to building the thing and the time that it actually opens its door is going to be a period of years.
And things could change.
Things change.
So some of these plants may never actually operate.
That is possible, and some of them that are currently under construction could conceivably be converted to natural gas before they get to their
Yeah,
point
that's a
of
relatively easy thing to do.
opening. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I've been reading about solar power being used to heat boilers in conventional type power plants.
Okay.
And I really don't know about the technology of that, but it is something that could be done. Where I don't know if it means the solar power is being used during the daytime and natural gas at night or what, but it is something that I've been reading about.
Well, ultimately, they're going to be using the cheapest power available at the time to do what they need to be done.
Yeah.
And I would imagine what they're doing with what you just mentioned is they're using resistive electric power to heat the water.
I don't know that that's what it was. I had thought it was solar thermal. It was not. It was
Well,
not,
then they have to build a solar thermal
they have
plant.
to build a solar thermal plant that will heat the water. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But anything you do when these huge power plants takes time, and so the conversion from one thing to another can take a period of
Well,
of time.
the investor class wants centralized power,
Yeah,
but I don't think the economics are there anymore.
I don't think so either. And it's getting more decentralized in terms of the leaning.
What's happening in Australia
It's happening in the United States.
is people are just pulling off the grid.
Oh yeah.
Period.
Yeah, I know.
And what is it? They call it a death spiral.
Death spiral. Well, there have been banks, both U.S. banks and European banks, that have been saying the same thing would be. The same thing is happening in Germany. They've got a death spiral going on for their utilities, and the utilities are saying it very plainly. And the banks are saying it, and the banks are saying that it's going to be happening in the United States. So,
Well, I think technology moving in that way is going to make it
I think
inevitable.
so, yeah. Next item. The Fish and Wildlife Service, and this is from CNN. The last one was from Business Spectator, and I should have mentioned that the first one about the Queensland utilities was from Renew Economy. This one is from CNN. The Fish and Wildlife Service expects to grant a permit to the Shiloh 4 wind project near Rio Vista, California, within 30 days that would allow for the deaths of 5 golden or bald eagles over a 5-year period without penalty. This is interesting because of the commentary that follows it, which, a lot of environmentalists are very upset about this, and they don't want wind power plants to be allowed to have a take on eagles. Mm-hmm. And
It's not that this is very large.
not only is it not very large, but it's not new. I mean, this is the first of these permits that is being granted to a wind power plant, but similar permits have already been granted for many years for other things. And one of the big deals is transmission lines, because the eagles will land on the transmission lines.
And they're big enough.
Yeah,
to
and they're big enough to fill out a
arc between the
exactly.
wires.
And so they occasionally, and not all that infrequently, are killed.
And
Transmission lines are much worse than
They're also going to like to nest on top of these things.
they. On top of which, the transmission lines.
Transmission
Yes.
line poles.
Yeah. Well, nobody told them when they were kids not to do that. But they're, and the. So I think that has to be taken in a broader context than just it's the first wind power plant to get a permit like that, because these permits have been allowed for all kinds of things for many years. And the reason is because if you don't have a permit and you accidentally kill an eagle, you are potentially in a great deal of trouble.
Yeah, this is big badness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the next is Saturday, the 28th. And this from the Energy Collective. An important new World Bank report concludes that just a few key policies aimed at cutting carbon pollution could boost the global economy with an estimated GDP growth between 1.8 and 2.6 trillion dollars.
It's a big number.
I can't count that high. And I can tell you, that's right. I can tell you that, You could throw one heck of a party for that amount of money. And you
You're
know
all
what?
invited.
You're all invited. For $2.6 trillion, how many people are there in the United States? That'd be enough to invite everybody in the United States to a real wingding. Okay, and that is the global economy, and I believe that is the growth. They're talking about annually here, I think. And this is something I've been getting from the banks a lot in the last few weeks, is that if we really tackle global warming, climate change, renewable energy, and things of that nature, we can make a load of money out of it.
Just the only problem there is who the we is.
Yes, well,
If the we is the right people, it will happen.
if you could figure out a way, anybody out there in TV land, as they used to say, anybody in TV land who has an idea on how Koch Industries could make money with renewable energy, if it's a good idea, you could save the world.
I would not at all be surprised if Koch wasn't all sorts of invested in renewable energy. They just don't want to talk about it.
Well, they've got a lot of investment that's threatened by renewable energy.
That's for sure.
Yeah. That was from the Energy Collective. Now, this from Just Means, also on Saturday. During the year's first 4 months, renewables provided 14.5% of all electricity nationwide, 14.5%. Wind power grew past the 5% threshold to 5.15% of U.S. electric production. This is for the first 4 months of 2014. And solar increased 108.9% year on year. But carbon emissions are also growing. 108% growth in 1 year is almost alarming. It's so big. I think it is alarming. I mean, just project that for 10 years, and you've got the solar panel that took over the world.
One here, because it's interesting. Renewables are growing.
Yeah.
But we still have higher carbon emissions.
Yeah, and
So we're doing the right thing, but not enough of the right thing.
Well, I think when you're looking at a 4-month period, you're looking at something that's not necessarily statistically significant. That's the first thing. And the second thing is there's a lot going on. I mean, for example, Germany has had a huge growth in renewable power. They've also had a growth at the same time in the use of coal and their carbon emissions. But the reason why the coal and carbon emissions grew is because they closed down 7 nuclear power plants. And
they need something to replace that power.
That's right. That's right.
And the cheapest alternative right now is fossil fuel plants.
The cheapest alternative was to start up mothballed coal-burning plants. They've got lots of coal. Natural gas is extremely expensive in Europe. They've got a natural gas supply that comes into a very large extent from Russia through the Ukraine.
Through the Ukraine, right.
So they've got political reasons not to use natural gas, or at least not to depend on it. And they've got that coal. So, do you have something that you wanted to comment on? I see that you've got.
Well, this is the article you're talking about.
Okay.
It's up there.
Okay.
I'm just trying to see, is there any takeaway from this thing? I guess I'll just read the last sentence.
Okay, do it.
The more extreme weather we have been experiencing has been causing higher energy usage. Duh. In a positive feedback loop that contributes to even more climate instability.
That's why we had a higher than usual.
Yep.
There you go. The next item, also on Saturday, is from Yahoo News. German lawmakers adopted a law on Friday to reduce renewable energy subsidies as the government seeks to keep its green energy transformation on track, curbing rising prices, and fight nagging criticism. And this is something, the Yahoo News had that take on it, and I've seen other takes in which they're saying the German government has abandoned renewables to big corporate interests and so forth.
I don't think anything like that's happening at all over there.
Well, there's been a lot of misinformation about that whole transformation. And, before Angela Merkel got reelected, there were all kinds of people in the United States in the media who were projecting that she would not be reelected because of the energy transformation, the Energiewende, and her reelection, as the time approached, got more and more clearly supported by the polls. And so that they had to abandon that position, but they clearly did not understand what was going on in Germany. The average, the price of residential power was going up, but the amount of money that was being spent by Germans on residential power was going down.
That almost sounds impossible.
It almost does, but you see, the thing is, the Germans, if you look at renewable power in Germany, what you find is that the overwhelming majority of the capacity is owned by individuals, families, small farms, and small businesses.
And co-ops.
And co-ops, that's right. And so when this capacity was added, the people who invested in it, which is probably half the population,
it is widespread.
it's very widespread. Those people saw their energy bills going down, in some cases, into negative territory, so that they were getting checks every month instead of getting bills. And in the meantime, the people who had not invested in it,
they were paying more.
Were paying more, and not a huge amount more. I mean, the bills weren't doubled, but they were substantially more. And but the American commentators tended to look at the price of the power and say, if this happened to me, I'd be upset. Well, if they were in Germany, they might be happy with it because they might be among those people who were making money. And just before the government was really taking up its position, they had a protest in Berlin attended by 10,000 people. And what were they protesting? They were protesting the potential changes that might be made. They were protesting because they were afraid things were going to change.
Yeah, so they're happy with what's going on.
They were happy with what was going on, and there were a lot of people in Germany who wanted to invest in co-ops and so forth who had not been able to because the co-ops had a limited number of people who could be joining based on the amount of power they had. Yeah. So in order to get more people to join, they'd have to build another wind farm or put up a wind turbine or something. Very interesting what was going on there. Let's see. Next item, Sunday the 29th. Microgrids are attractive to universities, hospitals, and military installations aiming to protect their critical loads. They are also attractive to communities looking to survive the next storm, a dynamic spurring development of a new, potentially controversial grid model.
I got this one up.
This came from Scientific American. What do you have?
About microgrids.
Microgrids.
And it explains, for those who don't know what a microgrid is, a microgrid combines various loads with distributed energy resources and advanced control equipment. That's the clue, control equipment.
Yep.
Meaning computers, to allow portions of the electric grid to operate independently of the larger grid network, or to island, that's the word, in the case of the macro grid going down.
Yes.
So they're still part of the grid normally, but if something happens, they're still running.
Now, just as an illustration of this, taking Brattleboro and, say, Marlborough and, say, Guilford, if we were to have 3 microgrids, one in Guilford, one in Marlborough, actually 4 microgrids and 2 in Brattleboro, we could have a situation where if the grid goes down, all 4 of those areas, 2 halves of Brattleboro plus Guilford and Marlborough, could be operating on their own based on their own generating power, which in the case of Marlborough might be a combination of solar and wind, but in the case of Brattleboro might be a combination of solar and biofuel. Mm-hmm. And if
you bring in Wilmington, you've got some hydro up there.
Absolutely. You've got a lot of stuff going on, and you could go out to Searsburg if you really wanted. If you had the capacity to connect these islands together,
Which you would have.
which you could have.
That's not rocket science.
Well, it's not rocket science, but it's something you'd have to plan for.
Yeah. It's doable.
It's doable. And that would mean that even if the grid were down for a week, we could have our refrigerators running, and we could have our gas stations pumping, and we could have the municipal building recording this show.
So you may not be able to catch your favorite show on TV, but you are going to be able to go down to the store and get a gallon of milk.
Yeah, and if you're operating on a smart grid with a smart meter, you'd be able to say, I want the circuit that has my refrigerator and my furnace and my air conditioner running, and then maybe say, but I'm not going to use the lighting upstairs or whatever. It's a way of, and particularly as we approach a situation where global warming becomes more of a problem, which can also be, it's climate change. It can be global warming producing colder winters in Brattleboro. It would be a way of ensuring that we're going to be in business even if the rest of the world is.
I see this model catching on because it just makes sense.
Oh yeah, it is catching on.
I mean, it's going to take a while.
Yeah,
maybe 20 years, but it's going to catch on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, that was from Scientific American. The next is from Engadget. In the past, renewable power needed incentives. In Germany, however, the energy market is on the cusp of evolving to the next step, an era in which the sun and wind replace fossil fuels through sheer, unstoppable force of the market.
I think you ought to repeat that one. That's a biggie.
Okay, this is a biggie. What it says, in effect, is in some parts of the world, Germany being an example, the price of renewable power and the various trappings that go with it, which possibly include storage power and
I think definitely
things like that,
yep,
is going down so fast that we could expect to have no need for incentives to get investment. So the people in Berlin who were protesting the change to the energy policies that had existed in the Energiewende may have been anticipating a problem that really will no longer exist because the prices of these things is going down so fast. And as I look at this, I'm seeing a situation where now, we've been experiencing the price of solar power going down very, very fast. People have been commenting on this for years. The price of battery backup, I think, is about to go through the floor.
I would tend to agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of different people working on different approaches, and eventually they're going to hit that nail right on the head.
Well, we came across
whoosh.
one. I think we came across one this week, which I think maybe in our. But if we don't get to it, I'll bring it up at the end of the show anyway. There are several different reasons why the price of battery backup power could be going to a quarter of what it is. And in some of this power, I'm wondering if it isn't going to go to about a tenth of what it is. And that will be transformative of the grid because it means that solar plus battery costs less than grid power.
I think eventually it's inevitable.
Yeah, but last week we were talking about this too. There was a bank. Which bank was it? Barclays.
Yeah, they wrote a big,
They were
big
saying
article.
that 20% of the people in the United States would be in a position where it would be cheaper to buy solar and batteries than it would be to buy grid power within 4 years. That's not all that far into the future.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And this is Barclays.
This is Barclays.
I mean,
That's
they're one
right.
of the biggest banks in the world.
That's right. And you get that same kind of information from UBS, and you get the same kind of information from Morgan Stanley, and you get the same kind of information from Bloomberg, and you can just go through list after list after list of these big organizations that are advising people on where to place money, or which are placing their own money in places where, and the only people I know of who are investing in coal is the Australian federal government and a few of the Australian state governments. Poor people in Australia. Okay.
I'm looking forward to the day when coal will be used only for jewelry. It's going to happen.
Well, you know,
I won't see it. But
have you ever heard of biocoal?
yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's something that is, and I mean, if you think about it, the charcoal that people use, the briquettes that people use,
It's in effect biocoal.
it's in effect biocoal. And I think you could see, we are seeing people convert coal burning power plants to power plants that are burning biocoal, which has the enormous advantages of not having mercury emissions, not having sulfur emissions. And you know, you just go through the list of reasons why biocoal is cleaner than coal. And then you get to a point where you have to ask yourself, is it going to be cheaper to convert this plant so that it scrubs the output and makes it clean? Or is it going to be
Or
cheaper
change the fuel
to change
source.
the fuel source? And it may be cheaper to change the fuel source. Okay, next thing, and this comes from the Energy Collective, and it's been all over the news in the last week. Risky Business, an organization founded by Tom Steyer, who is very wealthy, Hank Paulson, Hank Paulson was the Secretary of the Treasury, wasn't he?
I believe he was. Yep. He's
and
one of
He's one of the
robber
biggies.
barons.
And I think he was Secretary of the Treasury under George W. Bush, I think. I think it was, no, wait a minute. Who was he Secretary of Treasury under?
I can't tell you. I know who the Assistant Secretary of Treasury is, Paul Craig Roberts, but he
Okay.
wasn't the Secretary.
Okay.
He did the heavy lifting.
Okay,
I got this one up there,
okay.
showing a picture of a glacier.
A picture of a glacier, yes. Tom Steyer, Hank Paulson, and Michael Bloomberg, who is not a slouch, despite what some people have to say about him. The three business giants released a report detailing the extraordinary risks that climate change pose to the nation's economy and to future business climate in the United States. What do you got there?
Their conclusions. The conclusions these guys wrote into that report.
Okay.
First, investments in water infrastructure need to take into account future climate impacts to ensure adequate supply for industry. That's water.
Yeah.
Okay, and just something that you did yesterday, I guess it was, had to do with Boulder Dam running out of water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
They've downgraded Boulder Dam.
So this is a big thing, and if industry and population centers are going to survive, they got to do something about the water supply.
Yeah.
Now, take an example, New York City. New York City has a wonderful water supply system. They started building that in 1890. They started gobbling up land up in the Catskills when nobody knew they were gobbling up land,
Right.
and building these reservoirs all over the place. And they have stood very well for more than 100 years. This is going to have to be done in other population centers. I mean, a lot of it's been done. Out in the West,
Yeah.
they've pretty well covered it. But the Midwest, I don't think there's enough.
Enough infrastructure? Are you
Enough
saying
water infrastructure,
Yeah.
for future growth.
Well, in the Midwest, a lot of the water infrastructure that they have built since the 19th century was built with a purpose of
Irrigation.
Well, irrigation and flood control. There was a lot of it
Yeah,
built
yeah.
for flood control, and a lot of it was built in misguided ways that actually exacerbated floods.
Well, the flood control stuff hasn't been utilized very much for producing energy, and it can be.
Yes.
I mean, it's right here in town, right here up and down the Connecticut River. There's flood control dams
Yes.
that work controlling floods. It doesn't flood in Hartford, Connecticut anymore,
Or Springfield,
or
Massachusetts.
Springfield, Mass.
The stuff they've got down there, you can drive by it and you don't see it unless you know that it's there.
Up on the second floor, watermarks.
Oh wow!
Down Hartford.
if you drive down Route 91, you don't realize that Route 91 is in fact a huge dike.
No, I never gave that any thought.
And if you drive by Route 91 on the correct roads, you realize that the overpasses they've got on those roads are all built so that they can be shut, so
I
that they
never
can
even noticed
dump
that.
stuff into those things and and it will prevent water from going through. So the
That makes
Route
sense.
91 can be used in an emergency as a big dike.
Well, that makes sense. Sure.
Yeah.
I just never thought of that. Some of the other considerations. Second one, we need to make sure private insurers and the federally backed National Flood Insurance Program recognize the inherent risks we face due to climate change. Because of the increased flooding risk, there is long-term need to relocate out of flood-prone areas.
Yeah,
So the area of the shorefront condo is over.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because they're taking a
Yeah,
hit,
those-
and they won't be able to get insurance, so they won't be able to build anymore.
And anybody who's building in a place where you're within a 500-year flood zone, that sounds like a safe place, except that you'd
The
better talk to
500-year flood zone isn't 500
Yeah,
years
right.
anymore.
You'd better talk to an insurance company and find out whether you can get insurance before you really start thinking
Yeah,
hard about
absolutely.
buying such a house.
And then the final one is we have to begin integrating climate impacts into our planning for future natural disasters.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys, this is some of the brightest people in the economic world.
Some of the biggest people in the economic world. These are not people who are
They're not dilettantes.
They're not dilettantes. They're not hippies. They're not wacko environmentalists. They may be environmentalists, but they're looking at this from the point of view of cost analysis and things of that nature. Our next item, UK government. This is from Monday, and this comes from a publication called Smart Meters. The UK government has given consent to go ahead with the East Anglia 1 offshore wind farm. It is scheduled to install up to 240 wind turbines and will generate enough power for approximately 820,000 homes. Now, Smart Meters didn't say this, and I looked a little bit further and found that this is 1.2 gigawatts.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. This is, as a wind farm, a wind turbine in an offshore wind farm, which is what this is, in that part of the world might have a capacity factor of 0.45. And what that means is that it will be running the equivalent of 45% of the time. Actually, it's going to be running almost all the time, but it's going to be running at a reduced capacity. If you take its nameplate capacity and you multiply that by the number of hours in a year, and then you compare that with the actual output in an average year, you'll find that it will produce 45% of the maximum that it could, which sounds pretty bad. But you compare that with a nuclear plant, or in the United States at any rate, and the nuclear plant will do about double that. It has a capacity factor of about 0.9. A coal burning plant is a little bit less, but than a nuclear plant. But these 240 turbines are going to have, with a nameplate capacity of 1.2 gigawatts, will have about the output of the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant. So this one wind farm would be enough to power Vermont.
You did mention this a couple of weeks ago. You didn't mention it on the show, but it was in your blog.
Okay.
And I had to look up, find out what's East Anglia. And if you take London,
Yeah.
you go to the right, it's to the sea.
Yeah.
You go north about 150, 200 miles.
Yeah.
On the way to Scotland.
Yes.
That's North Anglia. And I had a picture of it. I had a picture of it up on the map ready to go.
Really?
But you didn't bring it up.
Poor me. Poor you.
It's in here somewhere, but I'm not going to go try and find it.
Okay.
It'll take too long.
Yeah. But this is going to be the largest offshore wind farm in the world if it's built quickly enough before somebody else does the bigger one.
Well, it's going on all over the world now. It's
Yep.
only just started in America.
It's only just started in China, too.
And we got an enormous coastal plain or coastal shelf
Yes.
off the East Coast.
Off the East Coast and also the Gulf.
Far enough from shore, so it's not going to cause much in the way of problems. There are
Yeah.
fishing grounds to deal with and stuff like
Yep.
that. But the amount of land available for offshore wind farms is enormous.
The calculation of the DOE, as I recall, is that offshore wind, if we fully developed offshore wind in the United States, that would be sufficient to provide us with 100% of our electricity.
I would even expect more than that.
Yeah. Yep. And that
I would
was
even expect more than
that's an old
100.
figure, so it's before the people operating wind farms increased their output by using different designs of wind blades and also the software.
Technology's advanced there too.
The next item from Business Green. UK plans to drive investment in a new fleet of nuclear power plants took a step forward today. Well, we might say it's a step backward if we disagree. After Toshiba and GDF Suez inked a deal to build 3 reactors on the West Cumbria coast by 2024. West Cumbria is the west coast of England, just south of Scotland. So
I thought that was Wales.
No. Wales is a little bit farther south.
A little bit farther south.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's okay.
Yeah, it's the west coast of
North
England.
of Wales.
It's north of Wales. It's north of Liverpool. And it's pretty countryside, but it's a lot of it is anyway.
I bet it is, yeah.
Yeah. That from Business Green. On Tuesday, the 1st of July, New York's cities and towns can block hydraulic fracturing within their borders, the state's highest court ruled, dealing a blow to an industry awaiting Governor Andrew Cuomo's decision on whether to lift a 6-year-old statewide moratorium.
Yeah, this one I've
And
got.
there was some celebrating going on when that was announced.
This one I've got. There's not much to say about it that you haven't already said.
Yeah.
But the court has ruled that the town can say no.
Yeah.
You can't frack in my town.
That's right, and it's just a matter of passing a zoning ordinance. You know, and my understanding was that there were 2 towns that did this. They got lawsuits in the 2 towns. They went through the courts of appeals, and finally, by the time this was announced, there were something like 135 municipalities in New York that had already zoned against fracking.
That's interesting.
Yeah. They don't want fracking. And, you know, I think Governor Cuomo, I don't know what he's going to say, but you can
He
bet.
may not even sign this.
You can bet that if he says that it's okay to frack,
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot more communities that are going to say, no, we've got to put
I think you're right.
a zoning thing against this. The next item from Clean Technica, ACIL Allen, the modelers hired for the Australian government's review of the renewable energy target, suggests that the uptake of rooftop solar will be greater without the renewable energy target because customers will have to pay higher electric bills. So we're back to
that almost doesn't make sense, but it does.
It does. That's right.
Yeah.
The renewable energy target is saying the government has got to stand behind renewable energy and push it. And what this ACIL Allen was told by this anti-renewable energy government
They're
in
a consulting
Australia.
firm.
They're a consulting firm. They were supposed to do a model that would predict what would happen if varying amounts of renewable energy was supported by the federal government. And their models came out saying, if we have the existing renewable energy target, the prices for power are going to go down. But if we abandon it, the prices for power are going to go up for residential. Well, people are finding solar plus batteries, off-grid, whatever, is cheaper than buying power from the existing utilities.
Well, that's the takeaway from this one.
Yeah.
This is what it says. Whatever decision the government makes, having the target immediately, having it, and or removing the small-scale incentives, installation of rooftop solar out to 2040 remains the same. Whether they go up, whether they go down, people are going to continue converting to rooftop solar.
Yeah.
And they're talking about 14 gigawatts of solar modules. That's a lot of solar.
That's a lot of solar power. 14 gigawatts of solar. I don't know what the capacity factor for solar is in most of Australia, but I would imagine it's fairly high.
I would imagine it's higher than it is here.
Yeah, and solar in Vermont has a capacity factor of about 18%.
Is it that high?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, That's my recollection. I might be wrong, but I'm not very far off with that, I don't think. It might be as low as 15, but I seem to remember that it's 18. The capacity factor in much of Australia, I would imagine, might be as high as between 20 and 25%. And at that level, and you know, one of the things that people have to remember is once that solar farm is paid down,
Yeah.
It has
It's still there.
It's there, and it has a marginal cost that's almost zero, which means it costs, if a community owns that thing, and the marginal costs go to almost zero, that community is getting, in effect, free electricity.
Yep.
And that's going to continue as long as the solar farm is there, and nobody knows how long they last. These are really
They got no moving parts. They're not going to wear out. They will degrade a little bit with time, but they seem to be degrading much slower than it was originally predicted.
Solar is turning out to be a better deal than anybody thought at one time.
The very first article I have here, I think you skipped over it.
Oh.
It's about Scotland's first commercial energy park.
I did skip over it.
And the interesting thing about it is, while this is Scottish English, whilst the idea of farming sunshine in Scotland may seem odd to some people, the lower intensity of sunlight is compensated for by longer hours of daylight.
During the summer.
During the summer,
Yeah.
making solar power a viable source of renewable energy north of the border.
Yeah, that's right. Now, if you think about it, folks, if you've got a tracking system at the North Pole,
you'll still get
you're going to get solar 24
solar.
hours a day for half the year.
Well, you know, it took me a while for this thing to sink in, but the amount of solar energy or the amount of daylight you get is constant everywhere in the world.
Yes, that's right.
Even though you get long days and short nights here and medium-sized days, it equals out.
Yep.
So there's still, everywhere you go, the same number of daylight hours in a year.
That's right. And the only difference in the availability of sunshine, the differences depend on two things. One of which is the weather. In New England, we have a lot more clouds than they have in the desert in the Southwest. And the second, actually, a second thing is, Desert Southwest has a disadvantage because solar panels operate at a higher efficiency when they're cool.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the third thing is the angle at which the sun comes through the
amount of atmosphere it has to penetrate.
Exactly.
Yep.
So at the North Pole, you're going to get solar 24 hours a day for half the year, but you're going to be getting it at a reduced power because of the amount of atmosphere it's going through. So I suppose we should go on to the next thing.
Why not?
Okay. The next decade and a half will see renewable energy rise in its share of European generation capacity from 40% in 2012. 40%, I'm sure, means they're counting hydro. And you have to realize there are countries in Europe where 100% of the power comes from hydro.
Oh, yeah.
Or very close to it. And this was happening for reasons that had nothing to do with green power. Albania, for example, historically has been 100% hydro. 40% in 2012, and they're bringing that up to 60% by 2030, while the share of fossil fuel sources such as coal and gas falls from 48% in 2012 to 27% in 2030, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and this was in a publication called Nanowerk. Nanowerk. I don't know what country this is in, so it is Nanowerk. I would think
Sounds kind of German.
It sounds German. Nanowerk, but it might be, you know.
Jawohl.
Yeah, jawohl. The next item from Clean Technica. Several research studies have shown that renewable energy could wind up saving U.S. consumers tens of billions of dollars. Two of them found that $26.7 billion a year could be saved in two separate areas, the Midwest and the Rocky Mountains.
Now, how are they going to save this?
I think that means that they're not paying for fuel, so it costs less to buy renewable energy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The next item, which is from the Business Spectator, and this is Wednesday, the 2nd of July. Bloomberg New Energy Finance foresee that by 2030, we've already referred to their report, the world power mix will have transformed to one with over half of the zero emission energy sources, saying economics rather than policy will increasingly drive the uptake of renewable energy technologies. And this is something that I think we're seeing, is that the renewable energy supports that governments are putting in are helping introduce renewable energy. But renewable energy is increasingly going to be introduced without them. And we've already referred to this in this show.
Well, we're reaching the point, we're not there yet, but we're reaching the point where we won't need subsidies anymore.
We won't need subsidies, and the reason is because we're reaching a point where renewable power plus storage is going to
be cheaper,
going to be at grid parity or below.
Yep.
And I think that in some parts of the country, that is to say the United States, this is already true in some parts of the world, but in some parts of the United States, notably in Hawaii, it's already true. In Alaska, it's certainly already true in many areas because they don't have a statewide grid. I don't know how many grids they've got, but I think anything in Alaska is almost definitively a microgrid because they aren't all connected. Juneau is not connected, I think, with Fairbanks. I might be wrong, but I don't think so. The next item is this. This is fun. The German state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern generates 120% of its electricity from renewable sources, according to a new publication. Reportedly, there are over 1,600 wind turbines in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. It's hard for me to pronounce that. Which is also a top tourist destination for Germans. This was from Clean Technica.
I think I have something about it. It's not exactly the same thing, but I'll bring up a picture.
Is it a picture of Lübeck? No, it's a picture of something
else. This is Marienkrug. It's in Denmark.
Oh, okay.
And there's a picture of some nice brown cows and a nice brown windmill. And and what's interesting about this one is in Belgium, there are so many cooperative energy projects.
Yeah, Belgium is really leading the way in that. Were you at that thing about a year?
I wasn't.
You were not. A fellow from Germany and another fellow from Belgium came to Brattleboro and gave a talk up at SIT, and they were talking about the co-ops in Germany and Belgium, and the Belgians, you know, the stuff they do with co-ops is just amazing. There was one, and we mentioned this in an earlier show, a town decided that it wanted to have a co-op to put up a single wind turbine. And so they invited people to invest, to take shares in the co-op, and they did that as in a way which was simple crowdfunding. And they had this wind turbine which cost $1.5 million, completely subscribed in 13 hours. They raised $1.5 million for a wind turbine, crowdsourced in 13 hours. And that was a turbine which was put up in the town.
Okay.
So, you know, it's, or at the edge of the town.
Seems pretty familiar to me.
Yeah, we talked about it.
We've looked about this one.
Yeah.
The takeaway here is interesting. In Belgium, residents are taking energy production into their own hands.
Yeah.
By setting up investment projects in which anyone can become a shareholder.
Yes.
This is an opportunity for citizens. Production of energy comes close to them. And they mentioned one of them called EcoPower, a Belgian renewable energy cooperative set up this way, which is partially funded by the European Union, so they got some outside money in it.
Yep.
attempts to stimulate citizen investment in renewable energy. So this isn't exactly a grassroots movement. They're getting some government money to do it.
Right.
But they're doing it, allowing anybody to buy shares and therefore become a member of a project. So it's just ordinary people.
It's just ordinary
It's
people.
garage
And
mechanics,
this is
it's
basically
doctors, it's lawyers, it's food service workers.
Barbers and you know, janitors and so forth, school teachers. And
This particular co-op, EcoPower, had 37,000 members. It's a pretty big co-op. It owned 11 wind turbines, 3 hydropower installations, 1 biomass installation, and 270 solar panel installations.
270.
Yeah, these guys are thinking big. If they can do it, we can do it.
Absolutely. Although their legal situation may be more conducive to that sort of thing.
It probably is.
Yeah.
That's changeable. That's
Yep.
changeable.
Now,
For example, right now in Vermont, and maybe other states as well, but in Vermont, it's impossible for outside investors to invest in a co-op.
Okay.
And I don't think that's a good idea.
Well, yeah.
I might as well bring it up now because I got a friend who's interested in this kind of stuff. And he studied this kind of stuff, and he's talking about forming some sort of, not a co-op, because of this law, to produce wood pellets in Brattleboro. And I've invited him to come on the show.
I think we should have him on.
And I think we will, and I'll get in touch with him. And
I think
maybe
that's an excellent
within
idea.
the next month we'll get him in here.
Yep.
He's done a pretty interesting presentation.
Well, we could have a presentation on this show, I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, we only have about 10 minutes left, and we've got
9
still
minutes
got
and
about
53 seconds.
5 items to get through. So I think we'll get through them. After studying production data, this is still on Wednesday, and this is from Resilience. After studying production data from 65,000 wells from 31 different unconventional shale rock formations in 2012, geologist David Hughes predicted big trouble ahead for North America's unconventional hydrocarbon revolution. That is to say, he's saying it isn't going to work out as planned. This is fracking.
Oh, fracking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, it isn't. They're not getting the
We
yield.
could have told him that.
They've been expecting wonderful yields, and they get these wonderful yields for about 9 months, and everything drops out.
Yeah. And it's turning out to be more and more expensive. Shell abandoned all of its North American fracking. Now they've abandoned its Ukrainian fracking on the basis of the idea that they couldn't support a government that was bombing its own citizens, or that's what they said. But of course, they had been looking for a way to get out of fracking in the Ukraine for some time, apparently. And the next 4 items are all from today. Thursday, the 3rd, despite 5 months of below average temperatures and twice the normal amount of snowfall, when the National Institute of Standards and Technology's Net Zero Energy residential test facility, this is a home. This is a net zero ready home that has been rendered net zero energy.
So it's kind of a science project.
It's a science project. But it's a serious test. It ended up its 1-year test run having and the amount of energy that it used was 491 kilowatt hours less than what it produced. So it was net positive energy for the year. That in heat and electricity for the home.
That's encouraging.
It is, and you know, I talked to a contractor in New Hampshire, a guy named, I think I mentioned this before, Bob Irving, and he said having a house that is 90% of the way to net zero costs the same amount if you're building a house as a conventional house does.
Why not do it?
Why not do it? You know, and I said, why is that? He said, you don't have to buy a furnace.
I got a friend who lives in a hay barn house, a hay bale house.
Yeah.
And she says that she's exaggerating a little bit. She says, I could heat the house by boiling a pot of tea.
Well, I told you, I think about a guy in Brooklyn who built an apartment building, and the
Yeah,
apartments
yeah.
in it are heated by a floor mat in the
In the
bathroom.
bathroom.
This is really
So
good.
we got a long way to go here.
Yeah. Next item from Business Week. Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority could give de facto approval for a restart of the Kyushu Electric's numbers 1 and 2 reactors at Sendai in southern Japan as soon as the 9th of July, according to the Sankei newspaper. And they didn't cite a source on, Sankei did not cite a source on this, but that was in Business Week. So they're moving ahead with opening up, reopening their reactors. I don't know how many.
There's a lot of opposition to that in Japan.
There is, and I don't know how many of those reactors they're going to reopen. It costs a lot of money to run a nuclear reactor. And when, as more and more solar is put in, and I realize solar is not a big deal in Japan yet, it's hard to argue with the economics of marginal costs approaching zero. How are they going to do that? Well, that's, 10 years down or more. But next item from Renews. The United States will hold a commercial sale auction on the 19th of August for up to 1.45 gigawatt Maryland wind farm energy area. This is offshore. It would be the third such sale of offshore wind development. And 1.45 gigawatts, and of course it wouldn't be that big, but that's a lot of power.
Absolutely.
And the final item that we have for today, Danish wind farm manufacturer Vestas Wind System received 740 megawatts worth of new orders in the last several days. 740, and by the way, this is not worldwide. This is in the United States.
Okay. Vestas is what, Danish?
Vestas is a Danish company, and it's not the largest wind company in the world, but it's, or at least my recollection is that it's not. But there's something like 8 or 10 very large wind turbine manufacturers, and Vestas is Iberdrola, General Electric,
GE, of course.
Siemens, yep. And it's hard to name them all because there's about 8 or 10 of them. And there's one of them, and I don't think it's Vestas. I think it's General Electric, but there's one of them that stands out. It might be Vestas. But 740 megawatts of wind turbines is a lot. Not just in terms of power production, but in terms of cost. Somebody is investing something like $2.5 billion. And they got $2.5 billion, or $2 billion, or $3 billion, or whatever it is, in a couple of days. This is a big deal for a few guys in Colorado.
For you guys who have some money, it's a big deal.
Yeah, right. And those wind farms are in Kansas, Minnesota, New Mexico, and North Dakota. And the way things are going these days, they could be supplying power to Vermont.
Oh, absolutely. That's another trend that up until very few years ago, you generated power within a state. It stayed within the state.
Yes.
Now they're crossing 500 miles of other states to get the power from where it's being made to where it's being bought.
Yeah. In fact, they're going farther than that. And I've read, for example, a wind farm in, I think it was Nebraska. It might have been Kansas, but my recollection is that it was Nebraska, was supplying a fairly substantial amount of power to a utility in Alabama.
And there's one in Utah that's feeding Southern California.
Well, there's one in Wyoming that's going in, and they're going to feed Southern California with a couple of gigawatts. Yeah. And that, in fact, the amount of power that they would produce would be approximately as much as the San Onofre nuclear power plants. So we're seeing, and in 1986, the DOE or whatever the department was at the time, I don't remember if the DOE existed at the time, but the U.S. government did a study of electric capacity and transmission, and they came to the conclusion that it was cost effective to transmit high voltage DC no further than 4,000 miles.
Well, that's changed.
And high voltage AC no further than 2,500. Now that's with a 9.5 roughly percent line
Power
loss,
loss, yep.
per 1,000 miles. But the line loss was changed as technology improved, so that 10 years later it was about 6.5%. So that increased from 2,500 or 4,000 to much larger figures. Now we have superconductors, and it's possible to have high voltage capacity transmitted over lines that have line loss that is less than 3%.
Now, does that include the cost of refrigeration?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
They're getting it down there.
They're getting it down like that. At that level, you could generate wind power for crying
Anywhere
out loud,
in the world.
You could generate wind power in Australia and deliver it cost
anywhere in the
effectively
world.
to Vermont.
Yep.
If you had that line, which would never be put in because it would be submarine, but if you could put in the line from Tierra del Fuego to Alaska, and generate at both ends, you could take power from any point in the line. You could be powering Mexico City and Denver and whatever, all simultaneously.
And stuff like this will be happening.
Yes, and it's
Maybe
interesting.
not exactly what you said, but something like this is going to happen.
We've got 15 seconds to say goodbye. Goodbye, but we're going to keep talking for people who are interested in keeping watching on the web, and I think we're going to be going on for a while. I don't know if we're going to.
Yeah, I got a few things to show up.
Okay,
So you keep talking, and then when it's my turn, I get some stuff.
It's interesting to me to see that we could have big businesses, because you'd have to have a big business to support electric lines of this capacity.
Oh, absolutely.
You could have big businesses say, okay, we're going to have a big wind farm in the Aleutians. Nobody lives in the Aleutians. Or we could have a big wind farm in Greenland. Or wherever, and we're going to have that wind farm, and then we're going to deliver that power to New Orleans. And that could happen at the same time, at the same historical moment, when local grids are losing businesses to microgrids.
Yeah.
So
the microgrids are going to be part of this new macro grid.
That's right. And so what I'm seeing is that the utilities they're going to have to change. And of course, this is human history. Things have to change. As technology advances, we have to change. Buggy whip manufacturing has declined badly since 1890.
Yeah, tell me about it. I invested.
But there are business opportunities here that are huge.
Oh yeah.
As long as you're not going to sit back and say, we've got a coal-burning power plant. It's worth $1 billion. I don't want to shut it down. If you're going to say that, and that's going to be your business plan, you're in trouble.
It's going to work. It's going to be the business plan for a while, but it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. But we're entering into an era in which I think companies are going to be saying, "Is this sustainable?" And they're going to be looking at the big coal plants, the big nuclear plants, and just even at some point in the near future, the big gas burning plants, and just saying, "Can we do this?"
For the last century and a half, almost, this model has worked well. It has brought all sorts of prosperity to America and to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But its day is over. It is now an albatross, or that's the wrong word, a dodo. Huh? It's on its way out.
Yeah.
And that's progress.
There were two articles in today's news that I thought about putting into the regular stuff that we were talking about, both of which I decided not to because there were other things that I thought were more important. But they were both saying, in effect, by 2030, there are going to be a whole lot of things that are obsolete. Coal, nuclear, natural gas, fossil fuel-driven vehicles, and utilities. as they're currently structured. All of those things will be obsolete 15, 16 years from now. And this is a picture which does not look pretty to organizations that are stuck in that mode. And it's not surprising, the people at General Motors, not only are they saying the current automotive market is not sustainable, they're even calling on world governments to do things that would reduce carbon emissions. This General Motors is asking for carbon emission reduction. So we've got, the world is changing. What have you got, Tom?
Well, I got some stuff that, again, this all came from your blogs, but we haven't talked about it yet.
Okay.
Well, we did mention this one a little bit, Lake Mead.
Lake Mead, oh yes.
Yeah, let me bring this guy up. Boulder Dam. And there's the dam on the left, and there's some of the turbines inside the chamber there. And they're heading toward about half of the power that they were planning because they're running out of water.
Yep. Now this drought has been going on for what, 12 years?
It's probably in here. It's probably in here. They turned this plant on in 1936. It was the largest hydro plant in the world. Each of the plants, 17, each of the power plants, this doesn't make sense. Well, I don't know what that number 17 is.
It's the number of turbines.
It must be the number of turbines.
Yeah, it is.
2,074 megawatts.
Which is the total.
Derated in June to 1592.
Right. Now that's those two figures are the total output of 17 turbines.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. So I missed.
I had to look that up.
I missed
it was
a word.
exactly the same problem. I actually looked that up by looking up
the capacity of 1592 is projected to further decline later this year.
Yeah.
Right now, the dam mostly provides power only during periods of peak demand. We pretty much shut it down at night.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a perfect storm or the lack of a perfect storm, or he said the perfect lack of a storm.
Yeah.
It's the 14th year of drought.
Oh my gosh.
And he references a stark white bathtub ring of mineral deposits encircles Lake Mead, evidence of water levels that are dropping at the rate. This is scary. 1.5 to 2 feet a month.
Yep.
Wow. And it's not just Boulder Dam, it's these other dams that are feeding Boulder Dam.
Right. People
Lake
think
Powell,
yeah.
Glen Canyon Dam.
Right.
This is all integrated.
Yeah. People think of hydro as being a 24/7 thing. And
well, it can be.
It can be if you've got enough water in the reservoir. But hydro is not a 24/7 thing, and it has a capacity factor that is lower than that of coal in general. The capacity factor for hydro, as I recall, is relatively low. It's like 65% or something. It's better than wind, higher than wind, I should say.
Now, this is the Bureau of Reclamation. They see Lake Mead's water level falling to 1,064 feet by May of next year.
Yep.
Oh, May 2016, 2 years. An electricity production of 1,120 megawatts that month. Why do they keep them in round numbers?
Yeah.
Asked about how low the water can go before producing power is no longer possible. How low can you go? We don't have a good answer to that, because it's never been experienced before.
Yeah, and they're going to have to get out of this drought pattern, but the drought pattern is something that was brought on to some degree by climate change, and climate change is not going to get undone anytime soon.
Not at all.
In fact, the projections that I've read on climate change, and this comes from multiple sources, the scientists are saying that if we stop emitting carbon today, altogether, if we went to zero carbon emissions worldwide today, climate change would continue, global warming would continue for at least 20 years, and some of them are saying at least 100 years.
We got to start taking carbon out of the air. instead of putting it in.
That's right, and we can do that. The technology to do that is all
It's
there.
here. It's here.
And that is something that a person could do and make money doing it. And I can explain, for example, one way that
Go for it.
Okay, forestry. You plant trees. You can cut trees. This is sustainable. You can do it with zero carbon emissions in a number of different ways.
Over the long period.
Over the long period. You can, for example, cut wood, use it in a biomass plant. If the biomass plant is built very cleanly, it's a clean combustion, better than natural gas. And if you are doing that, you can also manufacture liquid fuels out of the gas that you get to power the equipment that you use for your forestry. And you could have that combination going in just a couple of years. Now, once you've done that, you've got a zero emissions thing going on. You can cut wood, convert it to coal, and by that I'm looking at not bio coal, but at biochar.
Okay.
Biochar is carbon, it's charcoal made from
charcoal.
wood.
Yeah.
It's still got a lot of pores. The pores in the wood are still present there. They've been enlarged by the process of making charcoal. All kinds of things will live in the grains of charcoal, which could be as big
So
as...
the critters are going to find it comfortable.
Yep, the various microbes that you want in your soil, which will take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and turn it into nitrates to fertilize your fields, will go into the fields. They will live in there, in that charcoal, and you stop needing fertilizer.
So it's not the charcoal that is the fertilizer.
That's
it's
right.
created by the microbes that are living in the charcoal.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it's just like having, the thing that farmers have known since George Washington Carver. They have known that you can increase the fertility of a field by planting peanuts in it, or by planting peas in it, or by planting a bunch of other legumes. And that way you can have two rotations of whatever corn and tobacco or whatever you're growing in the South, and then you can have
and some peas
some peanuts
or soybeans
or soybeans, whatever, and that increases the fertility of the soil without the use of fertilizer.
Yeah.
Now, if you put charcoal in there, you would be increasing the fertility of the soil without the use of fertilizer, except that there's a difference, and the difference is that it's permanent.
Oh.
It's a permanent
yeah.
increase in fertility.
because those bugs are still there.
Those bugs are still there. The charcoal is still there. It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And it isn't a matter of fertilizer that is used. It's a matter of a soil amendment that permanently increases fertility. And there's been a lot of scientific research on this in the last 20 years. This is something that was developed first in South America. It was developed in the Amazon basin by Native Americans about 7,000 years ago. And the fields that they had where they put the charcoal that they had from whatever sources, my guess is that they were cooking their meals with firewood, dousing the fire when it was over, breaking up the charcoal and returning it to the fields. It was probably done for religious reasons.
Yeah.
I would guess. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
But
That's a good guess.
the fertility that they put into the field was permanent. So people are going through the Amazon basin, which is notoriously infertile. If you cut down that jungle, you can't grow anything on the ground without doing something about it, because the turnover, if you will, of materials is so rapid that it just washes away down the river. And the soil, when the trees are eaten up by termites, which takes a couple of days, you're not renewing the soil. But where they have put in this biochar thousands of years ago, the soil's black, it's growing things, it's fertile, and when people find it, they scoop it up, take it to town, and sell it. And this is entrepreneurship. Yeah, taking advantage of what somebody was doing a couple of millennia back. You could do that in Vermont. You could do it in Illinois, and it would make sense in Vermont. The way that the soil has been treated in Illinois and the Dakotas and Nebraska and Kansas, big, huge Iowa, big, huge areas where the soil is so thick, the topsoil is so thick that, I remember living in Illinois, and in the neighborhood that I was in, a construction company was building a house. They dug out the area for the foundation, and they had never broken through the topsoil in digging the foundation of a house. That soil has been, in many places, largely ruined by modern farming practices because it's not done with a view to sustainability.
But we've been told that this is a way to increase your profit.
Yeah, we've been told that. Now what we've got to do...
In the short run, it's correct.
Yeah, on the short run, it's correct. On the short run, you can grow fields full of corn, which is extremely destructive to the soil.
Yep.
Cotton and tobacco are both also
very destructive.
Extremely destructive. And you can put fertilizer in there, which is made in a chemical plant, and that fertility that you've added to the soil doesn't stay. It doesn't stay.
Yeah.
The corn is taking things out of the soil that putting ammonium nitrate into the soil is not going to reintroduce. But when you've got rich soil, they're starting to look at till-free or till-less farming methods, and they're discovering things that we had not known, like the fact that what is it, the root system, almost the what do you call it for fungus?
Mycelium?
Mycelia. Yeah, the mycelia of fungus.
That's the actual fungus.
That's the actual fungus. That's
what you
right.
see is the fruiting body.
That's right. These things in the soil, if you disturb the soil with plows, you kill them. If you don't disturb the soil with plows, they will grow. But they're not taking fertility out of the soil.
Yeah.
They're putting fertility into the soil. And they've even found places where, for example, there was an interesting study that was done. They took 2 Douglas firs, and they covered one of them completely with basically a bag that prevented it from getting sunshine. And what they found was that sugar that was produced in the sap, that was in the sap of one of those Douglas firs, was finding its way to the other.
No kidding.
And it was doing that by being conveyed
Underground.
by mycelia growing underground.
Oh, my darn.
And these things will penetrate the roots of plants. And penetrating the roots of plants will they'll go into a symbiotic relationship with those plants. So they will actually derive some nutrition from the plant, but they're also giving nutrition to the plant.
Yeah.
You disturb the soil, and that whole system is wrecked. And you can actually buy fungus mycelia that you can put in your garden, so that you can restore that. And there are places, Fungi Perfecti, which is in Oregon, as I recall. But if you look up fungiperfecti.com on the internet, Paul Stamets is the guy who did this. He wrote Mycelium Running. And,
I'm familiar with the company. I've
Yeah.
read about him.
Neat organization. And this is we've got research going on in this country in areas like this, biochar, fungus. If you think about fungus, this is a huge area, and it's basically unresearched. It's the
Not
research.
sexy.
Well,
Unfortunately.
yeah. Well, I think that's probably true. But if a person wants to do research, if there's a kid out there who wants to do research, there are areas where you could just do research. Paul Stamets, it's a great place. Paul Stamets basically did this because it came to him to be done. He was just a young guy, I suspect, living a kind of a hippie existence. Not a lot of money, in fact, very little money, and he had access to fungi, and so he needed food. He went through the forest, found fungi, experimented with different. This is a guy who was picking up random fungi, and saying, "Well, it's not on the list of poisonous ones. I'll try it."
And he's still around.
He's still around.
What you were mentioning about the topsoil being uh, picked up and sold, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was up behind the Holiday Inn Express last Monday,
Yeah.
and that solar farm there is practically completed.
Yes. Yeah.
It's almost completed, but why I even thought of mentioning it is when they were contemplating that and they went before the state, one of the possible obstacles was that the state was reluctant to lose agricultural soil.
Right.
And they found out that it was not prime agricultural soil because a generation or so ago the topsoil had been sold.
Okay.
So,
People are very destructive sometimes. Well, you know, one of the things that I've wondered about was what about, you know, what about the fact that these solar panels are growing up and they're covering land, and regardless of whether that land is useful for farming or not, you're converting habitat. And if you're going to maximize the use of that habitat, it's worthwhile asking what other things you can.
absolutely.
And one thing that they've done in the UK is they've built the mounts for the solar panels higher, so that
So there's
more
sunlight.
room underneath.
Yeah.
And in that room underneath, which is a lot of it is covered by shade now from the panels, they're allowing sheep to graze.
Okay.
And you know, a lot of grasses will grow in places
Relatively shade. Yeah.
relative shade. But one thing that I thought, you know, we talked about aquaponics in one of our recent shows, was that you could put fish tanks under the solar panels, and
Yeah.
and have basically a line of solar panels with a raceway underneath that you could use for raising trout or raising tilapia during the summer, or raising catfish, which is a local, you know, brown bullheads are local in Vermont, and they have a feed conversion that's almost as good as tilapia. And you can raise fish in a large fish tank under those panels, and you could, in addition to that, raise vegetables between them. So if you wanted to maximize your land use, you could do it.
People have to be figuring that out too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so eventually we are going to find out the optimal use of the land underneath the solar panels.
Yes.
You know, maybe it'll be something like raising rabbits. I mean,
Well,
who knows, you know? But they will find out.
they will find out. That's
and
right.
That's going to happen.
Yep. So have you got anything
I
else?
got another one here.
Let's see what you got.
One here. This one's a little closer to home. Burlington Electric has paid off the power plant.
Oh, yes. Isn't that nice? Yeah.
It starts off, it shook me up a little bit. The city of Burlington now owns a full half of the second largest power plant in
whole
the state.
half.
I thought they owned the whole thing.
But instead
Well, I knew Green Power owned a part of it, but
Yeah,
I
own the
thought they
whole
owned
half.
significantly more than half.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out, what's the largest power plant in the state? Duh. It's still there.
Yeah.
It still is
producing.
Yankee.
Yeah.
So here's the mayor. His name is Miro Weinberger. And he's posed with the city's 30-year bond that they just paid off
Isn't that
before burning it ceremoniously in the station's
nice?
furnace.
Oh, they shouldn't have burned it. They should have put it. They should
Yeah,
have
framed it.
framed it and put it on the wall.
So the city just completed payments on a 30-year bond for its stake in the 50-megawatt McNeil generating station,
Now, 50
which is very clean, by the way.
Yeah.
As generating stations go,
Yep.
For its day, it was cutting-edge technology.
And today we could do better.
Today we can do better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today we could build biomass plants that are significantly cleaner.
So this, I'll just read this. He donned a hard hat and tossed the bond into the plant's furnace as cameras were watching, as officials and Burlington Electric Department employees looked on.
Cheering, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, it seems like they only own half of the 50 watts that it generates.
But they did buy a dam recently.
They're
didn't
that's in here. Winooski 1 hydro plant.
Right.
So when you combine McNeil at 25 megawatts, half of the 50, Winooski 1 hydro at 7.4. We have ownership of the power contract, not the facility, with wind generation in Georgia and Sheffield, and a long-term contract with wind from Maine. We're able to source Burlington's electric power portfolio with all renewables.
Right.
So that's cool.
It is, yeah. And Burlington is the largest city in Vermont.
In Vermont.
So our largest city is 100% renewable.
Yep. And with this $8 million annually that they're going to save by not having to pay off any more
$8
of
million
this,
would go a long way toward Brattleboro's budget.
it certainly would. The city now has more funds available for other projects, such as completion of the purchase of the Winooski 1.
Or, if they wished to, building a roller skate park.
I bet you they have one already. But yeah,
Yeah.
they got
Heck
$8 million that they didn't have last year.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's see what next I've got here. Anti-fracking wins in a New York court. That's interesting. This is an interesting one. I'll just bring it up briefly. A Swiss aviator plans to fly a solar plane around the globe. Now, we know it's crossed the ocean, but I guess it hasn't gone around the globe yet.
This is a newer plane than the one that crossed the ocean.
No, I think it's the same one, Solar Impulse 2.
I thought
Maybe that one was Solar Impulse 1.
I thought that was
It
the
might
case,
be.
but I might be wrong about that. I know that they were building a new plane.
His name is
bigger.
Bertrand Piccard, and he has already circumnavigated the globe in a hot air balloon.
Yep, that's a lot of hot air.
And I think his father, yes it is. I missed that. I went over my head. Sorry, I got to take my hat off. I think his father was a balloonist, or grandfather. The name Piccard rings a bell.
He was the captain of the Enterprise in Next Generation Star Trek.
Okay. And he's doing this to raise awareness of renewables.
Well, yeah, and I think it does that. The idea that you could fly a plane around the world on solar power does not sound bizarre today.
No, it doesn't.
Because
it's not going to be continuous. It's not going to be nonstop.
Yep.
He's going to
Stop and eat.
make 10 stops. He will be making 10 stops. He's going to start off in the United Arab Emirates next March.
Okay.
And this is going to take him 4 months. He plans to remain aloft for 5 consecutive days and nights during the ocean crossings. Solar cells will recharge lithium batteries during the daytime to give the craft enough power to fly through the night. The plane will fly without fuel. Its wingspan is 236 feet, which is greater than that of a Boeing 747. And the wings carry around 17,000 solar cells. They must be small solar cells.
Well, they're not very big. A solar cell is, if you have a solar panel, it's usually made
It's a
up
lot of solar cells.
A lot of solar cells, yeah.
Providing a
80
large
or-
surface area for power generation.
Yep.
The plane is made of lightweight carbon fiber. It's a single-seater, and it weighs 5,000 pounds, which they say here is equivalent to an average-sized car.
Yeah.
I think most cars are less than that.
Well, I had a Prius, and my recollection is that it weighed close to 5,000 pounds.
I don't think my Mercedes is.
Well, Chris, you got to remember the Prius has one very big battery in it.
Very big battery, yeah. But it's kind of fun. I'm glad to see him doing it. I wish him luck.
I certainly would. Every time somebody does something like this, I wind up going into a state of anxiety because of what might happen. And the idea of being aloft in a solar-powered plane for 5 or 6 days and nights
scary.
is a little bit scary.
He can't be dwelling on that very much.
No, he certainly isn't dwelling on what he would
There's
smell
another
like when he gets back.
local project here,
Yeah.
Washington Electric, which is a small utility
Yes.
right near Montpelier.
Yes.
And they've been having problems with the state laws and how much renewable energy they had because they were having too much of it.
Yes.
And they've changed the law to allow them to sell the excess energy back to the grid.
Well, they should have had that going right from the get-go.
Well, it was state laws that were kind of screwing them up on it.
I know. The state laws should have been
They should have taken that into
been
shape. Absolutely.
thought through. But that explains to me why Washington Electric was not happy about having more people coming on. And I hadn't realized at the time that was a legal thing where they couldn't sell that electricity. Because if they can sell it back to the grid and they're selling it back at wholesale prices, current wholesale prices, that means that they can make money on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
At least I would hope that's what it means.
So their proposal here is they're going to add a fixed customer charge.
Which makes
and
sense.
basically that's going to take care of the maintenance of the grid.
Right.
And then a new grid service fee based upon the amount of power you use.
Right.
Which could be negative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is something that we have to face.
Oh, yeah.
As people who are in favor of renewable power, and I'm definitely in that camp, we have to face the fact that as renewable power becomes an increasingly large presence on the grid, that the people who are operating the grid have to be allowed.
They're going to make money too.
They have to be allowed to make
not
enough
charity.
money to live. It's not, as you said, it's not a charity. So people like Washington Electric or Green Mountain Power or whatever have got to be able to have a financial plan, a business plan that's going to allow them to make money. And if everybody had PVs on their roofs or in community power or whatever, the only way of keeping the macro grid that we were talking about a minute ago alive would be to have a connect fee.
We have, just like we have to pay these guys something.
That's right.
For maintaining the grid.
That's right.
They're in a business.
Yeah.
That's what they got to do. They got to make money doing it.
Yeah.
Or else, you know what's going to happen? They'll stop doing it.
They'll stop doing it, and we won't have a grid. Now, if we have microgrids that are sufficiently well designed and sufficiently well powered, we would not need a grid. But the cost of doing that, even at reduced prices, is probably, which we're hitting in the future, is probably always going to be something that would be in excess of the cost of, depending upon the next town, the next grid capacity over. And that requires those connections, which are going to be enhanced by the presence of a grid.
Well, I think the combination of a macro grid connecting innumerable microgrids together makes a lot more sense.
Yes,
we can no longer, under such a circumstance, we can never have a situation where everything goes down.
Yes.
Which we have had in the past.
That's right.
And that's a disaster.
Yep. I was in New York City in 1965 in November when that big Northeast thing happened.
I was too.
Were you? I was in college in those days, and I was going through I went through a dormitory. We had a 17-story tall dormitory in Brooklyn, and we were just south of the Navy Yard, which was Pratt Institute, and there were kids saying, "Oh, the Russians are bombing us." They shut off all the power so they wouldn't be able to find the cities, and it was, I just said, hey, wait a minute, look out there. You can see the Navy Yard. Their power is on.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the big question they had was, well, how come they get power and we don't? Which reminds me a little bit about a story of something that happened at the same time in New Jersey, which was that there was a guy in a neighborhood in, I think it was probably Mendham, just west of Morristown, but he was in a relatively wealthy neighborhood. Yeah. And he had a bunch of Aladdin lamps, those kerosene lamps?
Kerosene lamps.
Which are very, very bright because they have a platinum mantle.
They got a mantle, right.
And he, no power? Okay, light up the lamps. And so he had a fully lighted house while everybody else was black. And the power company got complaints because they were playing favoritism and supplying power to some people and not to others.
I got a funny story about where I was when the lights went out.
Oh, really?
I was in a department store, in a shoe department, looking at shoes.
Yeah.
And the lights went out.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that where I was standing, there was a company that made shoes, whose shoes had a little logo in there that was a glow-in-the-dark picture of 2 feet. So the lights are out, and all I could see is feet, little tiny feet
all
everywhere.
over the place. Yeah, I had college mates who were in the subways going under the East River when the lights went out, and a couple of these guys had to walk
Yeah.
on the tracks
Yep.
for something like a mile.
Yep.
And of course, I don't know what the emergency lighting was like in the subways, but I don't think there is any. I don't know.
There's certainly not much. I should know because I work for the Transit Authority.
Yeah.
I would have.
Well, they had to wait until somebody showed up.
Yeah.
And of course, they had to do that anyway because you don't want to get out on a subway track just because, the train
There's
is
probably emergency lighting where the people congregate, but there wouldn't be emergency lighting in the tunnels.
in the tunnels. Yeah. And
So
but they
somebody
said-
had to come down with a flashlight.
And they said, an hour and a half after the lights went out, somebody came down with some big flashlights and got all the people out of the train. And there were that was a mess, but it was not the last time it happened.
No.
I had another experience which was basically the same thing when I was in New Jersey when the lights went out, and that was really amazing because I had received a letter from Columbia University saying that they were turning me down as a student. I had applied to Columbia. And I said, no, this isn't going to work. I'm going to go to Columbia. So I called them up and I said, I'm going to go to Columbia. You got to tell me how it's going to happen. And this woman said, if we've turned you down, you can reapply, but the only way you're going to get in is if you can show better numbers. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I called up Drew University, which is where I'd been going, and I said, have you got the transcripts prepared? And they said, no. And I said, can you prepare one for me now? And the woman said, oh, sure.
Yeah.
So I drove from Morristown.
So you're doing well in Drew.
Yeah, I drove from Morristown to Drew and picked up my transcript. And the moment that woman stopped typing the transcript, the lights went out. And I took the transcript and in the sealed envelope that she gave me, and I drove with nobody on the roads because nobody wanted to drive without streetlights.
Yeah.
Because none of the streetlights were working. And I drove from there to Columbia in record time because there was no stops.
Yeah.
I got to Columbia and I walked in to the registrar's office and handed the envelope to the registrar, the head registrar.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not talking about some person. I walked
You
in.
went right up to the
absolutely to the top
boss.
person, handed the transcript over, and the lights went on. She opened the thing up, looked at it, and said, "You're accepted."
Okay, that was cool. That was cool.
But I got rejected and accepted the same day.
Yeah.
And the only difference was that the lights were out.
Okay, cool. This one I got coming up. This is intriguing.
Okay.
I don't even know if it's real.
Oh, this is real. Yeah, this is real.
Well, the picture's not real.
The picture is an artist's rendering, but they're
Well,
actually
look
talking
at that
about
thing. It
building
looks like
this
it's
thing.
got planets rotating around
It does, yeah. It looks bizarre.
1 kilometer high.
A kilometer.
These 2 new towers
Yeah.
will clean the water and air around them while generating power for neighboring buildings.
Yep. And this is something that people don't understand. There is such a thing as a catalyst. People don't know what catalysts are. If there's a catalyst and the conditions are correct, the catalyst will cause reactions, chemical reactions, specific chemical reactions.
Okay.
Without actually taking part in them.
Okay, yeah.
So you have a catalytic converter in your car. In theory,
It's not used up.
it's not used up. It'll get used up because of damage, but in theory, it's not used up. And what it's doing is it's taking carbon monoxide and broken down hydrocarbons and things and catalyzing them with some oxygen to finish that combustion, which is why they get so hot. But a catalytic converter will convert things, and a specific catalyst will convert things. Now, in a tower like these things, the catalyst could be titanium dioxide.
Bingo, you took the words right out of my mouth. We talked about that last week.
We did, and you know there are certain things in science that are just mind-boggling. They do so many
And
things.
titanium dioxide is incredibly cheap.
Titanium dioxide is one of the commonest pigments used for white paint.
Exactly.
It's also used for dusting donuts, and it's also used for a bunch of other things. Well, titanium dioxide happens to be a very effective catalyst for converting hydrocarbons, and that includes methane, into water and carbon dioxide. So you can take the hydrocarbons in the air, which in many instances are really bad.
Yeah, that's smog.
Greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
But they're also smog and particulate matter, and you can get them out of the air just by having something covered with titanium dioxide that's exposed to the atmosphere, which it very often is not in ordinary paint.
Here's
because it's
just
sealed.
what they're saying. These towers also have pollution-absorbing coatings to help clean the air. I bet they're titanium.
I would
Sorry.
bet. Titanium dioxide, by the way, is also used as a very thin coating on glass, which causes the glass not to hold
The dirt.
the dirt. And it gets washed off
yep,
by water. So the glass cleans itself. It's self-cleaning glass. This is one of those just amazing things in science.
So let's see what else I got. Well, we looked at the brown cows and the brown turbine.
Yeah. Yep.
This is an interesting one. It's a new word for me. Okay, it's called the rise of the prosumer.
Prosumer, yeah, this is a new word that has come up.
Consumer choice will be one of the biggest factors changing the way power companies deliver service over the next decade. Well, we've talked about that. We've been talking about that all
Yep.
along. Electricity delivery will eventually be a highly personalized, highly automated process that will include different service options based upon reliability needs, behavior, and consumption patterns.
Right.
And this is smart grid stuff.
That's right.
That's exactly what the smart grid is.
That's right.
It is clear that a surge in distributed technologies that empower the customer, creating so-called prosumers, are set to throw the traditional power delivery model into disarray.
Well, it's clear that it would throw the model into disarray.
Correct.
And what we should make more clear is that it is not necessarily going to throw the people who are running that model into disarray.
No, they're just going to have to change the way they're doing business.
Right.
Which we're not throwing them out of business.
Green Mountain Power is looking at a new business plan. You know,
Yeah.
what kind of business
They're pretty
plan will they have?
progressive.
A prosumer is a person who produces and consumes.
Exactly.
And so if you think about it, the prosumer is going to be producing more power than he needs part of the time, and consuming more power than he produces part of the time. And one way to deal with that is to be off-grid and own batteries that you put things in. Batteries are expensive, and they probably will, although
They're
the
gonna come
price,
down.
the price is going. I think in the next 10 years, the price of batteries is going to go through the floor.
Oh, yeah.
But and in fact, there was one
For a lot of different reasons.
a lot of different reasons. Did we talk about the flow battery last week?
Yeah. Yeah.
We did. Well, for anybody who missed that, we're looking at situations where you have a membrane and you have counterflow, where two liquids are going past each other and they're exchanging charges. Ions are exchanging charges at that time, which means that they're undergoing chemical changes. That's a battery, and a flow battery will put liquid in and take it out at the other end and store it, and so you can run it backwards if you need to charge.
So when you're putting energy into the system, the liquids flow this way.
Yeah.
And it gets stored up over here in some sort of a silo.
That's right.
When you want the energy,
Right.
the liquids flow that
back.
way, go
That's
back
right.
into the silo over there,
That's
and
right.
this will continue virtually forever.
Yeah, and they're talking about a new kind of, and this has been known actually for, the rough system has been known for over a year, but there was a new item in the news last week where they had come up with a battery that was run on quinone compounds, and these are relatively non-toxic, metal-free very inexpensive compared to other battery components, compounds that can be used, and they will produce batteries that will undergo more discharges than they say than lithium batteries, and cost about 1/10 as much. So you can wind up having very cheap batteries. It's going to take time to bring those to market. If they do come to market, they might not, because they might not work as planned. But nevertheless, right now, it's going to be better for everybody it's going to be cheaper for most people, I should say, for people to be grid connected than it would be to have a battery backup.
These flow units that we're talking about right now, what's being built, what's being proposed, are really rather large.
Yes.
These are big things.
They're big.
But it's only a matter of time before
They're
a
reduced.
backyard version of it's going to be available.
And I think it's important that we stress backyard version, because these are not going to be, or at least not in the near future, are they going to be used for powering pocket calculators.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
Maybe for
actually-
Paul Bunyan, maybe. But
Yeah, right. As I think about it, pocket calculators may disappear altogether in the not too distant future.
Well, really, they got smart watches.
They got smart watches, and I'm thinking, we're getting to a point where pocket computers are going to be that have, internet connections and things like that. And
Well, we got eyeglasses that'll do that already.
I know, but they'll be cheaper than pocket calculators.
Yeah. Got a couple more here that I'll bring up. First one is North Carolina's version of cow power.
Yes,
It's hog power.
yes,
And they have just completed a rather, I guess it's a large hog power biogas
yep,
engine generator
right,
combination.
right.
And this is a pilot plant. This is something new. But apparently, from reading this article, I didn't reproduce it all. There's a lot of hogs in North Carolina.
10 million of them.
That's a lot.
That doesn't. That's only the ones on 4 feet.
Okay. Digesters reduce greenhouse gas emissions from stored
That
and
was a
land
very mean thing to say. I should
Yeah, it was.
apologize. I'm sorry, everybody. I don't-
Digesters reduce greenhouse gas emissions from stored and land distributed farm waste by roughly 90%.
Yeah.
Because they're taking the
Okay.
methane out of the air and turning it into fuel.
Yeah.
And making generation. And what comes out of that? CO2 and water.
And compost that
And
can be used
compost,
for
yeah.
fertilizer.
Yep.
This is, we've said it before. We're entering into a new era, and the amount of power that they're talking about per hog is big. This is going to make a difference on the North Carolina grid.
The other one on that same picture there is kind of interesting. It's called this distributed renewable energy under fire. And in all of those orange states, there's a movement afoot to fight against distributed energy.
Yes.
Vermont is not one of them. New York is, interestingly enough.
Well, I wonder who's actually figuring out what it is to fight against renewable energy, because I've actually checked into what's going on in a couple of those states, and what they're talking about is states where utilities are requesting what I would call moderate increases in the grid connection for people who have got their own PVs.
What they say here is the states that are in orange have legislative or regulatory assaults on net metering or distributed solar underway. That doesn't mean they're going to succeed. Doesn't mean they're going to be passed. But people are pushing for it.
Yeah, but the point is, if the utility is looking for the state to pass a law saying that it can increase the connect fee for a person with solar PVs by $3 a month in order to cover the cost
Some of that makes
maintaining
sense.
that is something that they may be counting as an assault on renewable
They may
power.
very well.
And so I wonder, I know in some of these places they've got well-financed things going against the distributed power, and well-financed by fossil fuel interests.
Well, there are people with money invested that they don't want to lose.
Yep, in
They don't
coal
want
and
to. They don't
oil.
want to have stranded assets.
That's right.
Can you say Koch brothers?
Yes. Well, you know, this is one of the reasons why the Australian government is so upset about renewable power, is because they're looking at a simple calculation, and the calculation is we have X number of dollars, which is going to be billions and billions, maybe trillions of dollars worth of coal in the ground.
Yeah,
and if we abandon that coal, that's going to be money we can't make.
That's stranded resources.
Stranded resources.
Exactly.
And they don't want to abandon those stranded
Absolutely.
resources.
I can't say that I blame them, but they're fighting a losing battle.
Well, I can say that I blame them because I think they're not using foresight, but they have got assets. I mean, if you think about Australia and solar power and wind power, and even to an extent hydropower, although that's mostly been developed. When you think about Australia and their power resources, you realize there's a continent that could be entirely self-sufficient without taking anything out of the ground.
Without taking anything out of the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But if they do that, they can't sell what they take out of the ground.
Yep.
The problem, of course, is where is their market?
Right now it's China.
But the Chinese they have
That's
plenty of.
not going to last forever.
That's not going to last forever. And in my bet is it's not going to last a dozen years.
That's probably about right.
So
Well, you got to figure that in all probability, these people and their ancestors and their antecedents in finance have owned or have control of this property for generations.
Right.
And when they bought this property, it probably made an awful lot of sense.
Yes.
Because all of these things have really happened within the last 10 years to this extent.
Yes.
So, you make a bad investment, what do? You call up your nearest senator, the government bails you out.
Yeah. Well.
The takeaway here is, while a shift toward renewable energy and even decentralized renewable energy may be inevitable, it's clear that electric utilities won't let their protected monopoly profits go quietly into the night. Well, not every state has protected monopoly profits, but many of them do. It's the battle of utility 2.0 and ownership 2.0 writ large.
Right.
So it will all shake out. And these guys, I think they're fighting their last fight.
Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, it's an interesting thing to watch that government do what it's doing. But they've got, honestly, I think 2016 is going to come around. It's not that far away, and they'll be out of power after that.
Yeah.
This is a very big issue in Australia, and the overwhelming majority of Australians want them to develop renewable power. And by overwhelming majority, it's a 3-to-1 majority. 75% of the people in Australia are saying they want renewable power.
Yeah, the people want it.
People want it.
It's a small number of very wealthy people that are in opposition
Right.
there.
And there have been things going on in Australia that are really kind of peculiar for a long time. You know, the anti-wind movement in Australia, which was financed by very wealthy people.
Yeah.
Primarily, or at least initially. But these things have been going on, and it's going to be interesting to see how they shake out. I just hope they shake out before too much damage is done.
A number of years ago, I was part of a group when I was living in Wardsboro that was wanting to develop Ball Mountain and Townsend Dam for hydropower.
Okay.
And there was one guy kept showing up in our meetings and roundly condemning everything we were doing. I mean, this guy was a real big opponent.
Yeah.
It didn't come out till after he died that he was a big investor in utility stock.
Well.
And, he just looked like another guy. He wore suspenders like you do, looked like another Vermonter. But he was one of those secret millionaires.
Well, I can tell you, I'm not a secret millionaire.
You don't look like one.
No, I don't.
What do I have here behind
I have a brother who's a millionaire, but
Yeah,
he's
you
not
told me
secret
that.
about it.
And I asked you how he makes money, and you said he sues people.
That's right. That's what I said. I think he would want to clarify that. But I talked to him a
Yeah, you
couple of
told me
weeks
that,
ago. It was
yeah.
the first time I talked to him in 10 years.
I'm trying to come up with I got one here about behind the curtain. Grid operators reveal the path to reduce carbon. And I'm trying to reduce it to a couple of sentences, and I can't.
Grid operators do what?
Reveal a path to reduce carbon.
Oh, okay.
The electric grid contains many mysteries, and we will have to master many of these to reduce carbon emissions. Fortunately, the independent grid operators are increasingly pulling back the curtain on renewable energy and coal plant retirements, and the view is great. I'll just read some more of it then. Grid
ahead.
operators have vast data and computing resources that they use to make the lights stay on every minute of the day. Well, absolutely they
Yeah.
do. This is what smart grid is all about, and they
Yep.
have had their version of the smart grid forever. They couldn't operate without it. So I'll bring a picture of it up there. There's
Although in 1960, the grid was controlled by human beings. who
yeah,
made-
back in 1960 it was. Yeah.
who
Almost
made
like a
decisions.
telephone operator with
Yeah,
plugs.
yeah,
Well, there's a picture of the grid operator's room.
yes,
Well, every one of those things is a piece of moving information.
right.
So they got to be able to watch all of those things. And that's what they're talking about. They have vast data and computing resources they use to make sure the lights stay on every minute of the day. They can use and are increasingly using these same resources to forecast future grid needs and costs with reduced carbon emissions. And they talk about the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, which goes from, I think, Manitoba to Texas. It's right down the middle.
Yep,
It's a big outfit.
yep.
And they're revealing modeling details for a future electricity supply with more renewables, less coal, 23% less CO2, and only a 1% increase in generation costs over 25 years. So they got a good Ouija board there.
Yeah, although I suspect that the costs are going to go down rather than up.
Well, they may very well.
Yeah,
They may very well.
1% over 20 years, did you say 20 years?
25.
25 years is not very much increase.
No, not at all. Not at all. It doesn't even account for inflation. And I guess the last one I have here, we only got about 4 minutes, so I'll bring this one up. It's comparing Japan with Germany and how opposite energy policies turned the Fukushima disaster into a loss for Japan and a win for Germany.
Yep,
Japan is indeed poor in fossil fuels, but among all major industrial countries, it's the richest in renewable energy like sun, wind, and geothermal. I didn't realize that.
who knew?
And the take home here is they're not using anywhere near as much of that as they could be.
Right,
And it explains a reason why is the energy grid in Japan is very tightly held. Tightly held. Very few companies.
so they're not making progress into renewables because they've got high level of control over the grid.
They call them here regional utility monopolies.
Right,
The Japan government allows its powerful allies, regional utility monopolies, to protect their profits by blocking competitors. And since there is no mandatory wholesale power market, only about 1% of the power is traded, and utilities own almost all the wires and power plants, and hence can decide whom they will allow to compete against their own assets. The vibrant independent power sector has only 2.3% market share under real competition.
well, this is actually very like the rest of the industrial
To a great degree.
situation. I mean,
To a great degree. Germany is leading the way in the
yeah,
opposite direction.
Japan has got a very small number of very big companies that own a very large number of subsidiaries, in many cases down to ma and pa organizations that are owned by, huge companies. And Germany, by contrast, has got a situation where ordinary people can put power onto the grid and do
And
it.
are doing it in
Yeah.
great numbers,
Yeah,
individually and cooperatively.
yeah.
So that's pretty much everything I have that we haven't talked about.
Well, that's pretty good, I would say. That's
Where is my
good
mouse?
list of
Come on,
things.
mouse. Where the heck are you? Oh, I'm using the wrong mouse.
Okay.
It was better when I had a little mouse and a big mouse.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, you have a mouse with a tail and a mouse without one.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah.
Maybe you could feel for the cord.
So that's all I've got
Well,
here.
we should say goodbye to everybody.
Well, it might be a thing to do since we have 1 minute and 9 seconds left.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
So goodbye, everybody.
And we will be back on Thursday. We've got a guest.
Yeah, who's coming next week?
Well, I've forgotten Thomas Hand, I think his name is, if I recall correctly, and he's going to be promoting heat pumps in Brattleboro. He's got
Air source heat pumps.
I believe they're all air source heat pumps, and he's got a thing where if he can sell 25 heat pumps in 25 days, everybody who's buying one will get a reduced cost, and this is a substantial reduction.
That's sort of a crowdsourcing thing, isn't it?
It's sort of. It's very much like the solarized movement.
Well, I guess what he's doing, he's just dealing with a manufacturer, and the manufacturer's told him, if you could sell 25 of these things at a clip, we'll give you a deep discount.
Yeah, and
he's saying, I'll
maybe
pass it on.
Maybe I shouldn't be talking about this because he's going to announce it next week. But he's going to be on the show to talk about it and talk about heat pumps and how they work and why they're important.
That'll be fun.
It should be, absolutely. And people who don't understand heat pumps can find out. Heat pumps are probably one of the 2 cheapest ways of heating your house. And
That's correct.
the
It's
other
out of
being-
Vermont in 2014.
Yeah, and the other being cordwood, you've got a lot more work to do. Heat pumps, you can just kind of turn the
I think they're a
thermostat
lot
up.
easier than splitting wood.
That's right.
I've split wood, and it's kind of fun, and it can help you work out aggressions and all
Yes.
sorts of benefits, but it's work.
Yeah. So we have to say goodbye.
We did already.
We did. We said goodbye. Okay. Goodbye.
Goodbye again.
We spin and we toil, we work all day, sowing and reaping, we store goods away, so we can be dressed well on the day that we die. We dig and drill and waste what we find, break up the earth, leaving little behind, but we will grow lilies in the by and by. I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still.